Thanks, Melanie. Fascinating stuff. So before we get going this morning, I have a couple of programming changes to tell you about. Rebecca Grinspan's unfortunately been delayed, so we're going to postpone that session and do that next. We're going to start with the Keynote panel discussion on digital trade for smart trade. Unfortunately, we were hoping that Robert Koopman from the WTO would be with us for this panel, but unforeseen circumstances have meant that he is not able to join us. Luckily, we have three other very distinguished panelists to talk through this question with us, and I'm going to introduce them on stage now. First, we have Mike Baskaran, the Chief Operating Officer for Logistics and Technology at DP World. We have Karen Vergele, the Executive Vice President for Product and Design at Gant. Please have a seat. And we have Thierry Disson, the Digital Transformation Officer at DHL Supply Chain. So, Karen, I'm going to start with you. What does smart trade mean for your business at Gant?
Oh, nothing like jumping right into the questions. And before I start, warm welcome to you all, and thanks for taking the time to join this session today. And back to the question, what is smart trade? Well, smart trade means many different things to many different businesses. And I'm here today to really talk about what smart trade means through the lens of a consumer. Because there's no doubt that digital trade has exploded and turned our world upside down over the last years. And the reality is that has really given us all the opportunity to revisit what changes need to be done in a fast, agile manner to ensure that we are delivering on the ever-changing consumer demands that are continually popping at our door. So smart trade for me in 2 words is speed and agility, maybe 1/3 word, learning as you go.
Thierry, you manage supply chains for an enormous global sprawling company, 170,000 staff across 50 countries, I think. For you, what are the challenges involved with managing supply chains of that scale, and how do you implement the agility that we were talking about there?
Yeah, thanks, and a great question. Actually, I'll probably go back 4 years in time, and I started in this newly created role, which is the role of Digital Transformation Officer for DHL Supply Chain. And at that time, we saw 3 trends which were clearly emerging. One was labor scarcity. We saw in different parts of the world that it was hard to find enough labor. The second one was that we saw what I would call the Amazonization of also B2B business because of the growing e-commerce business. Expectations of our customers and our customers were changing. People wanted to, have things faster, have things, have more visibility. And then the third thing, luckily, there was a third trend that helped us with that was the technology trend. And then, if you then go back 2 years in time, a little bit more, when COVID hit, actually the e-commerce was even amplified extremely. So we saw a big shift from, traditional business into e-commerce business, also impacting very heavily our large B2B customers. And of course, the labor scarcity got a new dimension because of the virus. We were faced with factories being shut down from our customers. We were faced with our operations also being shut down. And we actually had a very big imbalance between places where we needed more people, for example, operations that were linked to e-commerce, and places that were shut down, for example, automotive customers. So, and the good thing is, to make a long story short, is that technology helped us, and we had started before the pandemic hit to make sure that we brought more digital solutions into our operations, and there's no way we could have managed this crisis as successfully as we did without these digital solutions. And then you think, okay, COVID-19 was a one-off thing, it's going to stop, but actually what you also saw was that the ESG, in Europe in particular, very important, environment, social and governance became more and more important. So that puts another strain on the supply chain. And of course, with the recent events, needless to say that we have again a very, very heavy impact on supply chains. So we're helping our customers by providing visibility, by being more agile in providing solutions to make sure that they can continue operating and continue serving their customers.
Mike, I know you have thoughts about how digitalization can help even the smallest companies and even the smallest markets, quite the contrast from Thierry's situation. Could you talk a little bit about that and about how you think changing patterns in trade can be of an advantage to those sorts of companies?
I think, yeah, and there's three aspects of trade that you normally, there's a physical trade, and then there is this technology trade, where you have access to data, and then you make like rapid routing decisions or ability to find containers in a space, digitizing and understanding where the location of the containers are, the fastest way to go back and then apply an HS code and then determine the duties associated with it, or rerouting simply, in multimodal. For instance, during the pandemic, there was a lot of like air capacity challenges that we had. So we together in Dubai with Emirates Airlines worked with a product called Sea Air, where the Far East customers could ship products to Dubai, and from here we would airlift it all over. So, but this is possible through smarter trade and digital trade, and this kind of solutions, the SMEs can take advantage of this as well. Another product that we've also developed over here is called Cargos Finance. So when you see a lot of SMEs today, they have to wait for they have working capital challenges, and they're underfunded in particular businesses right now because the money really is about $1.7 trillion worth of underfunded markets. So we are developing a product with container as a collateral, de-risking financial institutions right now and providing the opportunities for SMEs. So now with blockchain-backed technologies, we could easily offer smart contracts. When a trucker, actually line hauler, brings it to the origin port, we can already give him 20% of the overall value of the merchandise. And once it's in the destination port, maybe another 40%. And once it's surveyed, the final percentage. So this way, it significantly reduces the working capital burden for like a lot of SMEs in terms of managing their day-to-day business. So the construct of what we do in terms of the financial supply chain or the digital supply chain of looking at data and making rapid decisions for rerouting is like helpful for everybody, including SMEs, where we aggregate demand for them. And in some cases, they need containers. So we go buy a bunch of containers on their behalf right now and then start solving some of these complex problems where they're seeing lack of availability or lack of parts in the process. So what we do as a platform is for everybody. We want to make sure that, not only large organizations have benefited because they definitely get the benefit of tier pricing, but SMEs also get the benefit right now because of like deep expertise in data and making good decisions based on what we're showing them and sharing with them.
Could you expand a little bit on the role of the blockchain in the technology you were talking about there? Because we had a question from the audience that's asked us what the role is of new digital currencies in trade. Well, it's not a digital currency, but it's related.
Yeah.
So can you talk us through how that works?
Sure, absolutely. I would love to. For instance, one of the things, a good application of blockchain, normally when you take a technology, we try to force fit into a process and then see how we want to use like the next fancy, coolest technology. But one of the things about blockchain is the high fidelity that it provides. The example that I gave you, these 4 or 5 supply chain documents that you have, like e-bill of lading, the master bill of lading right now, packing slip, consolidated commercial invoice, the manifest. So once it reaches the origin port, financial institutions can actually start releasing money based on the availability, because the document aligns with the physical merchandise as well, which also gives a high fidelity for the number of players in that chain. So for instance, the example that I gave you, a trucker or an SME right now can already start, if they are working with a large manufacturer or a supplier or a buyer, they have the ability to go back and receive the merchandise based on, because the physical travel of merchandise is aligned with the data. So we know for high fidelity right now that the container has reached the port, and because we've received, in our DP World port ecosystem, and immediately we send a message through our blockchain platform, and the financial institution can decide, all right, I'm going to release about 40% of the money for the much needed working capital that's required. So that's a really good use case for us in terms of when we look at so many SMEs, millions of SMEs operating worldwide, they have to wait for net 90, net 120, some cases right now, to receive their money. And then they find significant amount of short-term working capital challenges to a point they're borrowing somewhere in the ranges of even high ranges of 24 to 30% in some cases. So, solving this problem using blockchain for us was meant enabling global trade, and then, facilitating more and more end-to-end supply chain, and then giving them much needed cash. So
that seems like an extraordinary benefit to the small company and the business involved. Karen, can I ask you to talk a bit more about what digitization means for the end consumer, the people you're serving at Gant? What can they see in all this change?
Well, I love the fact, Mike, when you talk about supply and demand and containers. I mean, containers have really thrown a wrench in my plans over the last few years. And really with regards to the changes that we've seen or the shifts in the consumer behavior, their behavior is a little all over the place. Their purchasing power has also shifted, the global reach and impact that consumers have today. And lastly, brand loyalty with regards to consumers. All of these levers are really fundamental changes that have resulted in how we as businesses can reshape our operating model and our backbone, and digital transformation has been a key part of that. But when we talk about the last mile, which is a lot of the discussion as well today, we've really tried to approach it, of course, based upon the consumer insights, as challenging as that has been due to the fact that they are continually evolving. But we've used that as an opportunity to actually try to set each of you gentlemen up for a much better place by the time it reaches the last mile. So within Gant, we've pretty much revamped our entire operating model with regards to the role of our collections. We have 4 collections a year. So what is the role of each of those collections? Mike, you and I talked about the role of the product category. So among the turbulent times, it was really important that we secure the business with those high volume products. So we've really looked at, okay, knowing regardless of what we're seeing with the pandemic, the products that absolutely need to be in front of the consumer, we focused on those first, and then we revisited what the rest of the collection looks like. And I think, of course, as part of doing that, it gave us a much better opportunity with regards to predicting the volumes so that we are in a much better place to secure or pre-book logistics and to ensure that we are delivering the right product at the right place at the right time.
Melanie was talking at the start about how supply chains have seen this massive surge in demand during the pandemic. That's obviously related to the changes in consumer behavior that were brought on by the pandemic and that you were talking about there. You were saying it's difficult to know what's going to happen next, but what's your hunch about the extent to which those changes persist or revert as the pandemic moves into the rearview mirror?
Oh, consumer behavior will continue to be agile as it's ever been, because that's our human nature. We're all consumers. We want what we want, and we want it now, and we want it personalized, because that's human nature. So I think even long term, the shifts that we've seen and the speed at which we've all been able to work through over the last years, that will continue to evolve, because once the consumer gets a taste of what is available, there is no reverting.
Thierry, do you have a view on that? You talked about the extent to which the crisis accelerated change. Do you expect that pace of acceleration to continue? Do you think we're going to see a bit of a reversion? What are you thinking about the future?
I think it will depend on the maturity of each company. Depends on the level of maturity that each company has. It also depends, I think maybe one thing I want to say, not related to the question, but if as a leader, if you're watching this, if you make sure that you people in your company feel psychologically safe. I think there's lots of change going on. So I think the most important asset, I mean, you mentioned it, 170,000 employees in our division, only more than 500,000, 650,000 in the group. Many people had to work through difficult conditions. So that psychological safety is really important, because we're demanding a lot from our people, also from ourselves, but also from our people. And yes, I think we want to accelerate in certain areas. The key thing is what Karen mentioned, is focus. I think if you have something that works, if you have a new technology that works, a digital solution that works, that brings you more efficiency, focus on that one and scale that one instead of jumping to the next one, instead of jumping to the next innovation. Focus on the things that matter. You have to focus now really on what works, what makes you more efficient, what makes your customers more happy, what makes your employees more happy. That's a really important thing, because the difficult part is not finding a new idea. The difficult part is scaling an idea and turning it into financial value, into business value for your customers. So I think your question, in my company, I know we're going to even go faster, but I think you can only go faster if you have certain guidelines that you've set for yourself, meaning focus, make sure your people feel good in your company, and focus on the things that work and scale these and do it step by step. Also, don't try to say, oh, I need a digital roadmap, and I'm just going to think for 2 years about my digital roadmap. No, think about that North Star, where you want to go, but also start doing things, because you learn a lot from what you do, and your roadmap is going to change anyway over time, because the external factors over time are changing, your business is changing, your customers are changing. So yes, have a North Star and a roadmap, but also be agile as you go along that roadmap and do things. Do things, learn from them, stop them if they don't work, but accelerate if they do work, because that's where you get the benefits from.
We've had a question from the audience about the challenges involved in digitizing trade, the challenges for organizations, what skills you need, how you overcome those challenges. Do you think managing the people inside your organization as you implement digital solutions is chief among those challenges as you look for scalable solutions?
It's the biggest challenge. It's the biggest challenge, and it depends. In the beginning, it's quite easy to find. We always go with the coalition of the willing, the people in your company who want to test out new things, the operations who want to test out new things. But once you're scaling, you have to bring it to a large number of people. And if it's not embraced by the people who have to use it, it's not going to work. So therefore, you need to spend at least as much time on the change management piece. Communication starts with communication, starts with engaging people very early, starts by explaining what you're doing. And if you do all of that well, actually we've seen, I get always pictures of every go live that we have where we implement some robotic solutions or whatever. I only see smiling faces of employees. So if you do it right, it is working well and it's well, accepted by the people in your organization. But you have to really focus on that change, and it also requires new skills in your organization to work with those new technologies. So that's also something you have to think about in terms of training and upskilling your people.
Mike, do you have a view on that?
I do. I think, it's just like for traditional organizations, as you're coming in and trying to go back, all the change management, that we just talked about. But I think the need for change case needs to be really built really well. We are fortunate to work for His Excellency Sultan bin Sulayem. I think he's a really good visionary as he designed. So for us, it was like relatively easier to go back and then put the path for digitalization and how we can quickly transform that into business benefits. Okay, so if we digitalize in this particular process, the example that I gave you, in terms of custom solutions or using something like a World Logistics Passport, somebody shipping containers from like China to like Far East to somewhere in Latin America, now through air can get about 8 hours benefit and then about 10 to 20% reduction in cost through the digitalization technologies we are building in. Or, if you just use the shipping lane right now, you're going to get there like about at least like 48 hours ahead of time, and again, significant benefits and cost. So transitioning that, in terms of why we are doing what we are doing, in terms of like crystal clear benefits to the organization, in terms of shareholder maximization, all of that stuff right now is extremely important. So that need for change needs to be very clear. And then you also need to have like top level support as well. So in terms of both. So that is a good ability to manage change management. So, and then everybody gets bought into the solutions right now, why we are building and what it is. And then you see like short-term benefits, like what you said in an agile form, that just rallies the troops right now. And then everybody starts believing, okay, I can see like short benefits. So, and to the point what, you mentioned earlier, Thierry, it's just like, if you take a long time of like, 24 months to design your strategy right now and start building it, then, you're going to just lose the focus over there. So I completely agree with what you said as well.
Karen, I saw you wanted to come in there. Sorry. What do you think is the main challenge involved in digitizing trade?
The main challenge is absolutely, it's the mindset. There's the technology aspect, and my background is also coming from technology. You get what you give, and you really need to understand what your end goal, your North Star is. So I'm in full agreement with regards to having a North Star, but being agile along the way. But if you're not surrounding yourself, whether it's internal with your own people or externally with strategic partnerships, where you're all holding hands on the same journey and having an open mindset, I think that's the biggest challenge. The technology aspect will be there, but as like with anything, technology also needs to very quickly evolve. And if you're not having the right stakeholders holding your hand on the journey, it will be a very painful journey, in my experience.
I'm an economics writer, and people keep telling me about the extreme labor shortage and skill shortage that they're experiencing in the global economy at the moment, given how rapid the rebound has been from the pandemic. So I'm very interested in your perspective from business saying, well, you've got to take your stakeholders along with you. Can there come a point where if your staff or your employees or other stakeholders don't like the digital transformation that's happening, you have to be agile? But what does that mean? I mean, how much profit are you willing to sacrifice at the end of the day to keep your staff happy, given that it's difficult to replace them in the current labor market? Do you have a view on that?
Yes, I do. I have a view on most things. I mean, it really starts, again, when we talk about digital trade, digital transformation, a roadmap journey, it starts with the end vision and making sure that whether you like it or not, that everyone sat around that table is holding hands on what that end vision is, and that everyone is clear on the roadmap to get there and what their piece of the pie is to reach that goal. And of course, I think we've all been in situations where you as an individual may not necessarily be fully on board with the roadmap that lays ahead. And of course, you should have a view, but it needs to be very much based upon business key drivers, KPIs, and the consumer. Because again, at the end of the day, regardless of what you put in place from a technology perspective, if it's not delivering value for your end consumer, whether it's health, sourcing, fashion, the end consumer is who we're delivering to. So we need to really make sure that the journey along the way is adding benefit for them.
Thierry, did you want to come in there?
What we have seen actually, if I look at our operations, is that we just can't handle the peaks and the troughs that we have in the volume that we get with people only. We've seen a big change due to e-commerce. Usually we had a very stable demand coming into our warehouses on Monday, Tuesday, Friday. We knew kind of which days were higher. But now we see even within a week, but certain weeks related, for example, to Singles Days or Amazon Prime Day, you just see repercussions on the entire business. So not just on pure e-commerce players, but also on consumer goods, on whatever fashion. You see that impact, and then you can't just manage your operations anymore with a fixed labor force. So you need to be able to flex up and down with people, but also with robotic solutions. There's just no way. We just went through peak season in December in some of our biggest sites. There's no way we could have first found enough people, and second, have trained them on time just for these 4 or 5 days of peak that we had. So what we do in these kind of situations is we bring in additional robotic solutions that work alongside the people. So I think it's a story of and. I think both will work hand in hand. We haven't had to lay off anybody. On the contrary, we still need more people. But actually, with the robots help us to actually grow faster and give a better service to our customers. So I believe in the story of both happening together and working together.
Do you think ultimately that digitization, therefore, is complementary to the employment of people to do tasks alongside the digital aspect?
I think we take away a lot of repetitive tasks which are not interesting for our employees, actually, and they will. That's what I said before about we'll probably need different skills from our employees. So we'll need to see how our employees can work with these bots together, but maybe focus on tasks which are adding more value, where the human mind or the human interaction is more important. But the boring, repetitive things that can be done by bot, let them be done by bot. But I don't think it's jeopardizing the overall need that we have in terms of labor. On the contrary, you see it in our numbers, or the labor needs that we have are increasing.
What about your labor needs, Mike? How has that been affected by digitization?
I think, a good digital transformation has to consider good change management solutions as well. I mean, some of the things that we see from a technology perspective is somebody is writing like in older versions of technology. They are some of the best technical program managers. They understand the business processes so well. So in terms of leveraging the capability of the folks right now, what they did and how do you do the change management and redeploy the skill sets into the broader, because there is so much activity going on in the platforms that we are actually looking at. So it's more like the challenge for us is like, how well do we take the best out of the individuals and manage through their strengths, and then figure out how do we give them like new skills in some of these areas right now. But in general, it depends on these two different aspects of digital transformation. One is like to go back and then increase productivity. And the other thing is like significantly increasing the top line revenue over here. So when there's a top line revenue solution right now, everybody's part of that. We have to provide like new skill sets. But then when there is a productivity activity, how do you go back and figure out the change management? And when you redeploy skill sets, how do you just like continue to go ahead and reinforce and train the associates over there? I think I'm very, very happy to just say like we've done really well in both these areas because again, what you mentioned earlier was we're able to like laser focus on 3 or 4 key areas that we want to work on and not necessarily take on. So I think our objective was to build an ecosystem for all our customers. If there is a freight forwarder who's having challenges with technology and he's not, so we built a solution called Cargo Runner and give him an ERP over there. But again, because of the focus that we had, it was able to help us right now continuously redeploying and leveraging the capability of like individuals who understand strong business process reengineering skill sets and then use them to go design new solutions for us. So.
We've had one question here from someone who's perhaps feeling a bit grumpy, asking why hasn't more change happened? Why haven't we seen acceleration or progress on digital transformation across countries? That seems to contradict somewhat what you guys are telling me about the pace of change that's taking place out there. Is it still the case that there's vast work to be done out there in the world implementing the sort of change you're talking about? Karen, let's start with you.
The question kind of ties back to my response earlier about will we retract or see consumers retracting? Absolutely not. Although we feel there's been great progress made, there's still so much to do. And I think that one of the reasons perhaps why people feel that it hasn't progressed as quickly as they would like to see, it's back to the workforce, it's back to the skill sets, it's back to the learning as we're going. So you take 5 steps forward and then 10 steps back. And I think that even if you use the example of shifting and the consumer shifting more from the physical brick and mortar space and moving over to digital and online, that's been a very fast shift that's taken place in quite a short amount of time. But if you look at the actual experience when you're online as a consumer, and the fact that there's really no emotional, social connection as part of that, is still very transactional based. I see that that's one area where the world is our oyster to really continue to accelerate the whole e-commerce experience for a consumer. So I'm not surprised by the question whatsoever, but I'm a glass half full type of girl. So I think there has been great progress. There will continue to be, but there's work to be done.
Thierry, glass half full or glass half empty?
Yeah, no, I've learned to be more patient in this role. I still am impatient and I still want things to go fast. But again, you have to make sure you implement things in a sustainable way as well. Not sustainable in terms of environment, so sustainable in terms of long-term sustainability. So you can't rush things. And then there's a few things that hinder us going faster. I mean, if you look at the portfolio that we have in terms of technologies that we deploy, there's things which are easy, right? I mean, you have these mobile devices like a phone that we use into our operations now instead of, for example, clunky scanners. But also saw in the movie at the introduction, we also have these bots that run around in the warehouse. For these bots, you typically work with very small companies. Many of those are based either in China or in the Boston area in North America. So it's not so easy to actually scale with these companies as well. So there's lots of reasons why things don't go as fast as they should. So it can depend on, when you mentioned it, Karen, it's so important to have an ecosystem of partners that you work with, but not all of these partners can go at your pace. And maybe an interesting observation that I've made was that these partners, these startup companies that have new technologies, they can move really fast in the beginning when they engage with you. And now we are the big machine that starts running like a diesel. But once we're running, they can't follow our pace anymore. So that's a contradiction, actually. So startup companies can go really fast in the beginning, but large companies, once they're running at pace, they can go a lot faster than some of these startup companies can follow. So you have to take all of that in consideration. And of course, the investment is there as well. The investment models that we have in our business actually are not helping us to make investments in digital. So unless you're very close to the CFO, it's really hard to get some of these investments through the business. And you need people who stick out their neck, business leaders who say, yes, I want this, because the traditional investment models that we have, at least in our company, don't always work in favor of some of the investments we would have to make digitally. So these are all things you have to take into consideration.
But capital is nice and cheap at the moment, right, out of the pandemic. Should we be seeing more investment in digital transformation if we need faster pace of change? Should the CFOs be getting their checkbooks out?
There's certainly a realization that we now can go faster and that we should go faster. And especially when you have things that work, as I said before, I see that our company really wants to go fast. Once we have something that works, that we've proven in, let's say, 5 operations, our CEO wants to see it in the next 50 operations, and then 3 months later in the next 100 operations. So he wants to scale it. So there's certainly willingness, and there's also financially more a willingness to invest as well, I see. And not necessarily jeopardizing the local business by an investment, but making some of these investments more centrally, so that in case they don't work, you're not impacting people's bonus, so to speak. Because at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants to achieve, right?
We've had a question from the audience on how stakeholders can leverage digital trade to enhance resiliency and sustainability in their business. I presume this does mean sustainability in the environmental sense. We're going to discuss this on a panel later, but I thought I'd give you three the opportunity to comment on that. Mike, what do you think about how you pair digitization and sustainability as goals?
I think if you find shorter routes and then less inexpensive routes right now, what we talked about, using like machine learning and so forth, I mean, I just want to tie it to the previous question that you asked as well, which is a very interesting question, because a lot of the work that we're doing in digitization today is very foundational. So not all the HS codes are actually filled in terms of duties. Not all the routes are developed right now and all over. We just continue to see that new routes physical routes being created all over the world. So I think digitization will significantly help in all of these areas right now in developing the solutions. And sustainability, the shorter the routes that you take, in terms of looking at it, obviously there is going to be less energy spent over there, and then creating like more and more like looking at solutions. So when you take a look at a broader routing solution, for us, the sea air was a great example that I mentioned. It just took a lot of like air capacity out right now because significant amount of the journey is done through sea. And there is also like variety of other areas right now in sustainability in terms of the engine technology that's coming in, and then all of the components that we actually, and then also looking at like the carbon footprint. Now in a lot of our technologies in Unifeeder, we highlight and then tell the customers right now how much are we consuming right now. So it's a comprehensive solution. When you define efficiency, design for X means like sustainability as well, design for change management, all of the above. So that becomes a good foundational design principle for us. So as you go through the pavilion, you're going to see many, many sustainable solutions that we have, and I'm so proud of this. I think our team of associates in DP World will be able to talk to you about all the activities we're doing globally.
I look forward to that. Karen, what do you think about sustainability as a goal as you digitize trade?
I think that's a great opportunity for the future. And I can tell you that insights show across the board when it comes to consumers, one reason to engage with a consumer, with a brand, and to stay with a brand is really with regards to conscious choices that they're taking as a brand. So I'm projecting that we're going to see quite an influx with regards to QR codes in the future, because with regards to traceability, transparency, from field to actual product, the consumers want to know, they expect to be given that level of transparency across the product portfolio. And I think that really with regards to what you've also touched on when it comes to, reducing the carbon footprint and also being able to communicate that in a very organic way to the consumers, it opens up a whole world of possibilities. So I think that that's what you're going to see as the next accelerator. Really, twofold will be sustainability and how to really put more of a digital space on that. And also when it comes back to personalization on e-com. They're my two main levers for the future.
Do you think that all consumers have that attitude, that sustainability is important, or do they sort of bifurcate into groups on the issue and then you target the ones who care? Or how do you view it as a trend?
My view is if you ask any consumer or any individual if sustainability is important, everyone will say yes, but the reality is, and insights also show, that it isn't the key driver to pull the trigger and purchase with a brand, but it's a little cherry on top, let's say.
Okay. Do you agree with that, Thierry?
Yes. I mean, as a company, we're very serious about sustainability and the three factors, ESG in general, so environment, social, and governance. And actually, if I look at the digital agenda that I drive, I have this little counter for every digital initiative that goes live. There's CO2 reduction. Honestly, I mean, it's either less paper or it's just less CO2 reduction because we optimize our trucks better. So I'm probably contributing more to the CO2 reduction than the people who really focus on it. Jokes aside, but it's no, it goes hand in hand. But again, it's not the sustainability goes beyond carbon reduction. But I think to go back to your question, consumers, I think a lot depends on the culture. I mean, Karen is based in Sweden, I'm based in Germany. I think those are two examples of where this sustainability is so high on the agenda. If I talk to my 3 kids who are teenagers, doing something not sustainable or not socially, for them, it's just in the world they live. So I think the consumers going forward, depending on where you live, but ultimately everywhere, I think will be much more conscious about that aspect. And businesses that don't follow either of the 3, the ESG, will just go out of business at some point in time.
Now, unfortunately, Robert wasn't able to join us on the panel, but I'm going to try and bring him here in spirit because he does research which focuses on how digitization reduces the costs of trade and therefore leads to more trade integration. So I'm interested how you see it, whether digitization is something that's primarily about reducing costs of what can be done, or the extent to which it actually changes the opportunities that are available out there and allows you to sort of reshape your business completely from top to bottom because of the new ways of doing things that are available. Mike, what do you think of that? Is it primarily about efficiency or is it about transformation?
I think it's both. I mean, in my mind, I think the example, if there is a coffee farmer in Rwanda, and then we are trying to take his coffee, which is like, they want to really look at like better packaging solutions to go up on the value chain right now in terms of cost and presentation. We have an opportunity with digitalization to go back and present a global market for, farm to table solutions. And I can go on and on and on about an onion farmer and mango farmer right now. And these are just not like, terms that you use to go back and then hit a major headline, but this is real. When you go talk to them and then they say like, how can you help us with this product? My coffee is selling significantly less than what it is should be in the market. And you talk to the different, all the way from like, folks who are responsible for business, the chambers of commerce, and then also like folks who are responsible for running countries. So from my perspective, digitization will actually significantly allow like revenue opportunities and find new markets and new solutions that we notice. And also like efficiencies. Like the simple example of efficiency could be like if we know pre-clearance and data right now through something like a World Logistics Passport, we can get like as easy as it is to just like get through Dubai and then cross for an individual. Shipment should be so much more easier to cross borders, so the digitalization will allow you to go ahead and do that. So thereby, I mean, today we find like vaccines taking a lot longer right now. Vaccines go in, but like syringes don't go on time. So many markets. I mean, again, if you have digitalization, this is a rapid solution. That's an area of efficiency there. So we see this, in terms of like the broader context, just like having a really good solutions for both.
Karen, I think you're going to tell me that it's about transformation. That's my hunch, but you tell me.
To some extent, but it's interesting because actually there's been a shift as well with the perception of investing in technology. In the past, it was all about, it's all about, taking a lot of money, investing in a technology that's probably not going to work. And the mind shift today is that it is a business enabler. It's a hygiene factor for any business in order to secure long-term sustainable growth. And with regards to even just when we talk about our own operating engine and how to try to find areas of improvement or gained efficiencies there, even with regards to open source tools and encouraging the cross-team collaborations internally and externally, also derive with, and positive end gain for the consumer because you are shortening all of the back and forth in between the process from concept to consumer. So I think you'll also continue, sure, there's always going to be discussions on the investment that's incurred with technology advancements, but you start to see more and more the return on investment and the gains once it's put into play. It's no longer only about, taking a lot of money out of our wallet.
We're running out of time, unfortunately. So Thierry, I'm going to give you the final word here. One thing that occurs to me is, to what extent do governments need to help aid the digital transformation that's taking place? Or perhaps it's just a matter of getting out the way. Is it something that you run up against a lot, a problem with regulation or with government blockages as you look to digitize?
I think education is probably one thing that would be good. If again, going back to the skills that we need, and we haven't even talked about data analytics, but it's also something that I'm driving into our company. You just need different skill sets than the ones you find on the market. So that means that we'll probably need to look at our education system again and make sure that we get more of these, and that's where I probably, again, depending on where you sit, where you have either public or private schools. Where I live, it's public schools, so you have to look at the government to make sure that they train the future generations more on skills that are just ever changing. So either you train them on specific skills, or you train them to be trained on learning faster. But I think that's certainly where the government can play. And then, of course, regulations, some are good, but of course some are hindering, to do business fast. So I think as long as there's common sense and engagement, I think talking and make sure that you engage with your governments is always the best thing to do, I think.
All right, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you to all of you for a wonderful and interesting discussion. Please could you join me in thanking our panelists today.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so I am told that Rebecca Greenspan is now able to join us digitally, and I'm hoping that she's going to appear on the screen at any moment. Rebecca is the Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development.